morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Kaylee happened to be a very good friend of mine, and she is a doctor and board-certified chiropractor, and she works for the water sports and physical therapy. She also works with the UCSD Intercollegiate Athletic Department as a chiropractor, and she provides chiropractic care to all the UCSD NCAA student athletes. Kaylee is a strength and conditioning specialist. She specializes in active release technique provider, and she does sports and training rehabilitation. Please welcome Kelly.
Thanks, Mark. I'm going to use Mark as a guinea pig later on when we do some moving around here. But like Mark said, I work for a company called Water and Sports Physical Therapy. We have locations all around San Diego. I work out of our La Jolla and Scripps Ranch locations, so we're pretty close by over here. Really cool thing about this company is that we have kind of a team approach to treating people. So we've got chiropractors, physical therapists, acupuncturists, massage therapists, and all of our locations are actually located within a gym. So we work directly with those trainers to kind of bridge that gap between doing sports rehab when you have an injury and to transitioning you into more performance-based training. And like Mark said, I work with the UCSD training room. So that gives me kind of a cool perspective on what's going on with different sports, because I see everything from our college basketball athletes to water polo to even things like fencing. So you get to see different injuries that pop up that are pretty common within the sport themselves. So what we're going to talk about today is basically sports training from kind of a rehab professional's perspective. I'll try not to get into too many little nitty-gritty details, because some of those things are not going to be super applicable to what you're doing with your athletes. But what we want to talk mostly about is giving you some insight on injury prevention, because that's going to be I know it's a big issue for you guys in terms of keeping your athletes playing. And one of the best ways to actually prevent injury from your guys' perspective is to work on a really effective warm-up, believe it or not. So we'll talk a little bit about a good way to structure a warm-up for your kids, giving them something that's a good corrective exercise, good movement patterns to do on a daily basis. So you're going to be really reinforcing these good habits and good motor patterns. And then we'll finish up kind of with a little demo of stuff that I like to give my kids, especially with regard to tennis, and Mark's going to demonstrate a lot of those kind of things for me. So in terms of common injuries that we're seeing with our tennis athletes coming into the office and into the training room, we see a ton of injuries with tennis, a big proportion in tennis with respect to other sports. And in a non-contact sport, why are we seeing so many injuries? It's expected in football, where you've got a lot of trauma, things that your athletes can't necessarily predict is going to happen. But in a non-contact sport, why are we seeing so much of this? And a lot of that's because tennis is really tough on your body for a lot of reasons. You've got a lot of change of direction at high speeds. You guys all know this, but a lot of high force output is required. A lot of coordination is required for your sport. And even little things like having an unforgiving playing surface to be playing on all the time. All of this stuff is going to be really hard on your body, hard on your joints, hard on your muscles, especially if you're not using the way the body is really intended to move. So your body's put together in such a way that you can have a lot of mobility, but it's also able to stabilize and able to distribute force when you're actually going through movements. So even just running, every time you take a step, you have 4 times your body weight going through each step. So you've got to be able to distribute that force through the whole body so one joint's not taking on too much of that. And the way your body does this is it has this alternating structure of mobility versus stability in each joint. So if you think about going up the chain in your body, your hips should be really mobile, above and below that should be really stable. So low back is stable, knees should be stable, ankles you should have plenty of mobility. So by alternating those joints like that, your body can stabilize in certain areas but still give you some mobility and control your motion. So kind of keep that model in mind. Any kind of change in that pattern is where we're going to get tissue damage, tissue injury, because we're putting too much mobility where it should be stable or too much stability where it should be mobile. So that's where we get tight muscles, things like that. So diving into some of these injuries, a big place we see a lot of injuries is at the knee with tennis, knee and ankle kind of stuff. So we're getting pain on the front of the knee is mostly patellar tendonitis with you guys. Lateral knee pain is actually usually IT band issues, so a lot of tightness there. We'll show you how to actually foam roll a lot of these things to address some of these issues. We'll throw a mark on the foam roller, have a good laugh at him. And we see a lot of calf strain. We learn about calf strains in chiropractic school. Believe it or not, it's called tennis leg because it happens so often with tennis. There's only a couple injuries where they're named by the sport that they're actually associated with, and both of them are tennis. So you guys know you have a tough sport on your hands. So we'll see stuff like meniscus tears and ligament damage, but that's all. I mean, really, if you're looking at it, you don't need to put a name on all of these injuries. It's all using the knee the way it's not meant to be used. We're putting too much wear and tear on those tissues that it's just not meant to stabilize like that. And with all of these, it's not the knee's fault necessarily. So the knee's where the breakdown's happening, but it may be because you have a lack of hip mobility. So the next place you're having to make up mobility is into your knee. So we're going to have to look, if somebody comes into my office and they have a knee issue, I'm going to do orthopedic testing just to kind of test the structural stability of the knee. But most of my exam is actually going to look above and below. So I'm going to do an ankle exam, I'm going to do a hip exam. I'm going to be looking at how they balance and how they move around. Because all that, I can fix the knee pain and make you feel better. But if you go back out onto the tennis court and do the same thing again and again every day, that injury is just going to keep coming back. And that's why we have kids who have the same injury over and over and over again. They're not fixing the real issue. They're fixing the site of the pain. All right. So yeah, just kind of keep in mind with knee issues, when you're working with your kids, what you want to work with, even if you don't really know what's going on, work a lot with them on hip mobility, work on balance issues, things like that. So putting them on single leg exercises will help work on balance there. But addressing hip mobility will knock out a ton of knee problems just starting there. So another area we're getting a lot of issues is with the elbow and the shoulder. So a lot of rotator cuff injuries, shoulder impingement kind of things. And the ever popular tennis elbow. Everybody, I can't tell you, people with elbow issues, 90% of the time will walk in and tell me they have tennis elbow. Everybody thinks they have it. So this is another injury where it's named by the sport. And not a lot of injuries are named like that. So we call it actually lateral epicondylitis, but everybody knows it as that. But again, with the elbow, we're not necessarily looking at the elbow as the source of the pain. I'm going to do manual therapy on the elbow itself, the muscles through there, working on the joint mobility there. But I'm looking up at the shoulder. I'm looking up at even upper back for elbow. Your elbow is a pretty small joint, and it's meant to be a stable joint. Your shoulder is supposed to be the mobile joint where you're getting a lot of motion. So even if you're putting a little spin on the ball, you shouldn't be doing all of it from your elbow. And that's where you start running into issues when you're doing too much motion with these tiny little forearm muscles as opposed to your big back muscles and your big shoulder muscles. And the shoulder and the elbow are actually a really tricky, they're very susceptible to pain just because of the architecture of the actual joint itself. If you think of your shoulder architecturally in terms of the bones, if you think of a golf ball sitting on a tee, that's basically what your shoulder joint is. It's not like your hip socket where you've got a bony support for the whole joint to kind of rotate in. If I had you guys take a tee and walk around the lecture today with a golf ball, you'd have a tough time just keeping it on there, let alone moving around or doing anything. So the only real thing that's really keeping your shoulder in its socket is your rotator cuff muscles. So that muscle contraction has to keep that humeral head, that golf ball, on its tee with every single motion. So even just sitting here, it'd be tough just to keep that shoulder in its socket. When we go into overhead motions, we're adding more force. Of course, it's going to be a little tough for those muscles to coordinate. But unlike any other place in your body, your shoulder's got so much range of motion that you kind of sacrifice a lot of stability that way. So the only way you're stabilizing is with muscle contraction and muscle coordination. And then add on to the already tough task of keeping that shoulder in its socket, the muscles that keep that shoulder in its socket are attached to your scapula. And your scapula isn't attached to anything by bone. It's attached by muscle again. So you're basically anchoring your shoulder on a floating bone. So again, you need muscle contraction just to stabilize the platform that you actually do any motion on through your shoulder. It's kind of like if you have the picture in your head of shooting of a cannon going off. So you get a lot of kickback from the cannon when you see that. But imagine putting a cannon in a rowboat and how much force would be wasted by that kickback pushing back because you're firing off of a floating platform, a platform that isn't stabilized. So if we're not stabilizing scapula first, stabilizing things back and down, we can't stabilize shoulder, of course, without getting extra tissue damage. And then if we change that whole structure of stability here, mobility here, we're kind of giving it a backwards orientation. So we're getting too much mobility here, shoulder's got to stabilize too much, and then the elbow takes on too much mobility, too much of the job of mobility, and we're just giving those muscles too much to do. Again, and even adding on to just the shoulder and the elbow, your upper back's got to be able to extend. If you can't extend through your upper back, even just sitting in good posture, your shoulder's going to have to do all of that work to pull it back, and you're going to get strained through the shoulders just from sitting at your desk. So all of those things have to be in place. Mobility, upper back, scapula's got to stabilize. The shoulder itself, where it sits in its socket's got to be nice and mobile, and that'll take some strain off the elbow itself. So keeping all of that back, keeping that good posture, and stability through the shoulder where you need it is how you prevent injury in the whole arm, really. Another place we get a lot of injuries is the low back. So you're in that kind of crouch position a lot in tennis where the back is rounded, what we call flexion. And that's kind of the mechanism of injury for a lot of disc irritation, so inflammation in the disc itself. You see a lot of injury with overextension with your serve. So when the back is arching too much and extending too much, we're putting too much pressure on those posterior joints in your back. And that's not to say that you shouldn't be able to flex your spine. You shouldn't be able to extend your spine, because obviously you should be able to do it. You've got to be in those positions for your sport. But the real issue is are we using the right muscles to do that motion? So when you're coming into, for example, with your serve, you do want to get that extension to kind of load the actual motion. But you should be getting that extension mostly with glutes, mostly with hamstrings, not with your low back muscles. Your low back muscles are small, and when they contract, they're going to actually compress the joints themselves. So we don't want to use those for that reason. But also, if you look at just surface area and mass of those muscles, you want to use glutes and hamstrings. You're not only going to prevent injury, but you're going to increase the force that you can generate with those bigger muscles rather than using those little tiny guys. So we're looking at, with all of this stuff, we're looking at not only preventing injury, but kind of performance enhancement. So being able to generate more force because you're using the body the way it's meant to be used. Actually a really good way to combat any low back injuries, the first thing I'm doing with my athletes, or even with my 80-year-olds, we're doing core exercises. We're doing core stability. So we're not getting our 80-year-old ladies a six-pack necessarily. We're working on stabilizing core first and then moving the limbs. Gives your body that stable point to work off of. So you're not having the muscles that are meant to move your body also doing the job of stabilizing. You should have stabilizing muscles and moving muscles, and those should be their primary jobs. When they start doing both is where we run into tissue wear and tear, tissue injury. So what's the point in all this? What's the point of going over all these injuries that I'm seeing? Because clearly I could talk on and on about all these injuries, and you guys would be bored out of your minds. But the takeaway is really that you don't really need to know names for all these injuries. You don't need to be thinking about how do I prevent tennis elbow necessarily, because really all that is a label for where you're getting the pain. I can work on all that stuff, and there's directions they point you in textbooks as to what you can work on in terms of what the actual injury is. But really, you're getting pain because you're doing something wrong. It's your body's way of telling you you're not doing it right. And when you're getting pain, you've been doing it wrong for a long enough period of time that you're starting to break down tissue. So forget about the whole name game. Don't worry too much about that. Don't worry about the rehab stuff. Give it over to the nerds. Give it to the chiropractors. Give it to the physical therapists, and they'll take care of it for you. But your goal should really be to get the athletes moving really well. So it's not just getting kids and adults out there and getting them moving a lot. It's getting them to do the motions correctly in the first place. And the way we do this is really with what we call movement prep. So it's kind of the new way that fitness and rehab professionals are referring to warm-up. We're kind of getting away from that term warm-up, because your warm-up is really meant, it's not just getting you moving so that your muscles feel warm, it's preparing you for what you're going to do in practice. It's preparing you for what you're going to do in competition. And we kind of lose sight of that when we just call it warming up. You ask your kids, like, oh, do you feel warm? And they're like, oh, yeah, I'm sweating a little bit. But that's not the point. So with movement prep, you've got to have intention with what you're giving your kids. And it's something that, like in my office, giving people corrective exercises is, I'll do it all day long, but they have to go home and do them. If they're here and they're in your practice and you're seeing them multiple days a week, if they're doing it every time they see you, then they don't have to take something home and do it. They get it done right when they're doing practice, and they're preparing their body for what you're actually going to put it through, especially in a sport as tough as tennis. So, one of the things we also have to get out of the practice of is just sending our kids on some kind of quick cardio, like they go for a run and then they sit in a hurdle or stretch, and that's it. We're doing static stretching, not a whole lot of warm-up, spending 5 minutes on it and then throwing them back onto the court. And it's not enough for our kids. And more studies are showing that static stretching really isn't that beneficial. They may feel like they're a little looser, but that flexibility isn't going to carry over into what they're doing necessarily within their warm-up. And the movements aren't preparing them for what they're actually going to do. So we're looking more at more dynamic movements for warm-ups. So even something like, if you're going to do arm swings, have them skip a certain distance while they're doing the arm swings. It gives your brain more to do. It gets more joints moving together and coordinating together. You can add in different like lunging movements, things like that. So you can take what you're already doing for a warm-up and just add in more movement with it. So yeah, it's one of the most important things you can do with your kids, because it's sport related. You're looking at how the quality of their movement rather than the quantity necessarily, which you'll do in the rest of your practice. And you're looking at how the athletes move. So really don't skimp on movement prep. It should take you at least 10 to 15 minutes to prepare for a workout as hard as you're probably going to give your kids, and that's okay. A lot of these things, once you're using a dynamic warm-up, you're using sports-related stuff anyway, so it's not like we're wasting time doing warm-up. So when you're actually structuring your movement prep or your warm-up, what are some things to keep in mind? So when I am structuring a warm-up like this, or a movement preparation, I want to work from simple movements to more complex movements. So you're building on those simpler movements and adding more complexity for your kids to kind of to deal with. And we're also working from the ground up. So I'll start my kids laying face up or face down. They're going to do some exercises there. They're going to do some exercises on all fours. They're going to move into half kneeling or tall kneeling positions, and then into standing. So we're adding more gravity to each of the positions. So that requires more balance, more coordination for your brain to deal with, and for your muscles to adapt to. So we're kind of gradually moving them into that. If you think about how we develop as babies, that's kind of how we do things, because that's how you learn to stabilize your core, learn to stabilize your movements. So we use that same kind of pattern when we're looking at movement prep. And then from there you can move into more dynamic kind of sport-specific movements, so plyometric exercises, things that require a lot more coordination, a little bit more speed, that kind of thing. And a lot of those dynamic sports-specific movements you can turn that into your actual practice exercise. So we'll kind of talk a little bit about doing the point agility exercise. You guys probably do a lot of things like setting up cones and having them do different exercises between them. But you can do a slowed down kind of more moderate version of what you're going to do in practice. And all you do is speed it up. You add speed to it. You add unpredictability to it. But the beginning part of it is them learning how to do that movement and learning how to do it correctly, so that once you speed it up, they don't start falling apart and they don't fall into their knees and they don't do funny little squats just because they can't really compensate for that speed and don't know how to do it. And then whenever possible, really try to individualize your warm-ups for your kids. So if you've got a small group and you know that one of your kids has terrible hip mobility, like he can't even cross his leg over into a figure four, he should be doing mostly hip mobility stuff in his warm-up to work on that kind of stuff and prevent injury down the road. Obviously, if you have a big group, you're not going to be able to do that, so you're kind of going to have to attack all the different areas that you need to get mobility where we need to, stability where we need to. And working on some balance exercises too should be incorporated into your warm-up. Especially with a lot of cutting, a lot of directional change, having balance and being able to coordinate the change of direction is going to really carry over if you're doing a lot of balance exercises with your kids. We'll kind of dive into some examples of stuff that I like to do with some of my tennis athletes. A lot of other athletes, I'm probably not going to send them on a jog necessarily. Like if I had a water polo player, sending them on a jog for a warm-up doesn't even make sense because they're not doing that motion. But with tennis athletes, you guys are going to be running, so a light jog, something that's not too intense or not too long either. I'm not sending them on a 3-mile run because they're not doing long duration runs. It doesn't make sense to do that. So they'll go for a pretty short, like 800 meters if you're at a track type of jog. If the pounding of running is a little tough on their legs, you can throw them on a bike. It's a similar cyclical motion, but without the pounding on their feet. So if you've got a stationary bike, they can do that. And then I'll throw them on the foam roller. So I'll have Mark come up here. He's going to show us some foam roller stuff. So you guys should all have foam rollers. This is the best way to stretch your athletes, safest way to stretch your athletes, and it lets them kind of individualize their warm-up. So with foam rolling, I'm going to have Mark start. You start with your calves. How about that? So he's going to go in a seated position. See if you guys want to take a look at what Mark's doing. Oh, he already knows. So he's going to just kind of lightly roll through the muscle. You're basically using your body weight to push into a muscle, so you can kind of vary how much pressure you need through there. He's got his leg crossed over, so he can put a little more push through the calf. If they're really tender, he doesn't have to do that. But he's rolling around, and he's basically on a mission to find crappy spots. That's what I tell my kids, find the icky spots. And once he finds a spot that's really tender, he's actually going to hang out on it. So it's kind of a counterintuitive exercise if you think about it. You would never find a painful spot to hang out on it. But hanging out there for 30 seconds on each spot, and by the time that 30 seconds is over, it's going to feel a lot better under that pressure point. When he rolls through again, he'll probably have a tougher time finding that spot. So you can give your kids a foam roller, and the kids who have really tight calves are going to spend a lot of time on their calves because they can feel that they're painful. But other kids are going to move on to maybe their hips. Their hips are super painful. So it gives you a chance to individualize a workout without spending a bunch of time on each individual kid. So if you have a group setting, this is an awesome one. So those are calves there. He can roll up, do his hamstrings as well. So he's in that same position. And he's rolling through hamstrings. So as much of the stretch as you can get, you can use your arms to vary the pressure you've got onto the hamstrings themselves. You can roll onto the outsides, onto the insides of the hamstrings to get all aspects of it. And then I'll have him actually roll down to his low back. So he can just do a quick roll, low back. This one actually feels really good for the most part.
That feels good.
You can even get the upper back. Yeah, really supporting the neck with that one as well. Mark's a pro at this, look at him. Good, and then I'll have him flip over, so we'll go through quads. If you've got kids with patellar tendonitis, throw them on quads for sure. I can almost guarantee that their quads are going to be insanely tight and they're going to have little angry spots within them. But he can roll through like that. He can even go add a little stretch to it, so he can bring his heel up to his butt. So he's going to put the muscle on stretch and then rolling through. He can hold that foot up with a rope or anything if he needs to there. But he's going on inside, outside of the quad, working all the way down, finding spots where it's a little tight, and hanging out on them. That's going to be the biggest thing for your kids is focusing on those spots there. And then go
Question
ahead.
for you.
Yeah.
So you're saying let the player roll, when you find a spot, just stop rolling and just sit in that spot for a
Yep.
while.
30 second. They need to find like 2 to 3 spots each muscle. If they've got no spots that are tender, then they're moving on to the next one.
Right, but they find just sit on it.
Yep. So everyone's favorite one, we're gonna have you do the IT band. So if you guys have ever foam rolled your IT bands, most people are pretty tender there. Yeah.
You gotta be careful not hanging out on joints, like it going all the way to the knee and hanging out on a knee joint.
Yeah. So you don't with foam rolling, you want to roll the muscle. If you get over a bony prominence, that's what we don't want. So that hip bone on the side, you don't want to be rolling over that necessarily, spending a lot of time on those. Just because the covering over your bone itself is really pain sensitive. So if you start rolling over bone itself, you're going to get a little pain there and a pain response there. So rolling through IT band, you're just on your side there, kind of rolling from just below that hip bone down to just above the knee. And kids with lateral knee pain, if they're getting pain like right on the side of their knee, 90% of the time it's IT band. And IT band is because your hips aren't stabilizing the way they're supposed to. So your IT band kicks in to actually take over on that one. And that's where you start getting the issues there. So really stabilize, if you guys know what monster walks are, that's a way you can kind of combat IT band stuff. So you're throwing a mini band. I didn't bring a mini band. Should have done that. You're throwing a mini band below their knees, so, or a TheraBand, you can kind of tie it around in a loop. And Mark will demonstrate the position for it. But they're just doing little lateral steps, and they should feel it kind of right in the hips right here. So if you put your hands on your hips, right where your thumb falls is the muscle they should feel that on. So when they've got the band around the knees or around the ankles, depending on what they can do, they can start strengthening these so you don't have to use the IT band so much.
The band should go up here, right above the knee. You don't want to put them on your ankles. Above the knee, right here. They come in different strengths, colors. There's blue, yellow, red, green, right? And a black.
And you can, I mean, if you guys have bands or tubing, you can use that too as kind of a way to do the same thing without getting more equipment. Okay. Anyway, I got on the side note there. Huh? Oh, I didn't grab it. So I'm going to start, once we've done some like short duration cardio there and foam rolling through a lot of those muscles, he can even roll into his shoulders as well. We'll go over, do you know lats? I guess we should have had a tennis ball, now that I think about it. Yeah, luckily for you guys, we give people tennis ball exercises all the time. You guys have tennis balls everywhere. So so it's a good piece of equipment for you guys to have. We usually got to give a tennis ball out to somebody. But here he's doing lats, so arm is right overhead. He can roll forward with his torso a little bit to get some of the rotator cuff muscle as well. So that one of the, so subscapularis is the one that's going to be kind of in the armpit there. That one's going to get pretty tight when people have shoulders that are dumped forward like this, which is going to be a lot of your like middle school athletes. They all want to be here. So working on that muscle as well. And then Mark, you can hop up and I'll show you. So there's a lot of things you can do with the tennis ball too, just leaning into a wall or on the ground if you guys don't have a wall necessarily. So he can go between in the front here. He's going to work on pec minor. So another good one for kids that are like this, or your desk jockeys that are like this all day. What's happened to them? Go arm down more. There you go. Down. So what he's doing there is we're working on the muscle that's right underneath your clavicle, and this one's pretty tight on a lot of people. If you guys want to try this when we get a chance to break here, you'll lean into a wall. Your body's about 45 degrees, so you can really get into there. Arm is low here, and you can even add a little stretch, kind of pulling the torso away. But this one's going to be really good for, again, desk jockeys, your middle school athletes, or kids that want to sit like this all day. Help pull the shoulders back a little bit, because those ones are going to be the ones that pull you here. And the more we can get out of this position and back into that good shoulder packed position, the less stress we're going to put on those muscles themselves. He can work that tennis ball kind of anywhere you have sore muscles, so he can lean into like rhomboids. On the back, yeah. He can work into the muscles that are right over his scapula as well, but just kind of rolling around, again, the same idea as the foam roller, is you're rolling around, finding angry spots and working on them there. But 30 seconds each spot is really the key there. So then I'll kind of dive into the rest of our warm-up. So we're going to start with him supine or prone. So I'm going to have him go face up, and the first thing we're going to work on is breathing. So he's going to go face up, knees are up. He can do legs 90-90. I like that one a lot. He can even drop the feet down if that's easier for him. But he's going to go one hand on the stomach, one hand on the chest, and what I want him to do is work on belly breathing. So he's going to take a breath in, and on the inhale, he's going to push his belly out, which is going to seem kind of backwards to a lot of people. But if you watch how a baby breathes, and I actually have a video of my week-old nephew, and he's belly breathing. They don't breathe with their chest. That's not what we're meant to do. When you take a breath in, your diaphragm drops down, and it actually creates enough space to suck air into your lungs. So when you're just sitting at your desk, you shouldn't need to be heaving your rib cage up all the time and straining all these other neck muscles here, and dumping you into this kind of funny position here. So he's working on belly breathing, breathing into that stomach, and that's actually the initiation of stabilizing your core. So you're breathing in here and then contracting here like you're blowing up a balloon. If you do any weightlifting or anything like that, you know that if you do that belly breath and you actually compress everything here before you do a squat or something like that, you can get a lot more weight and get a lot better motion when you do that. So he's going to work on that just to start with. And then from there, he's going to be in the same position. Put your feet up for me, and we're going to do heel taps. So he's going to contract the core like he's blowing up a balloon again. So he's already practiced a little bit of that with the breathing. Keeping low back flat on the ground, so he's really going to squash that low back down. And then he's going to tap one heel down to the ground and come back up without arching his back. So here we're working on kind of the problem with the serve where you're extending with your low back too much. He's having to stabilize his low back in a neutral position and then move the hip, which is what he should be doing when we're actually moving around. This one, it looks super easy, but give it a try, and it's actually pretty tough to do for most people. And then we'll have him drop the knees over to the side. We're going to do kind of a torso twist here. So he can go just sitting in that position, get a good stretch, or he can bring both arms over to one side. So keep the legs where they are. Legs to the side. There you go. Good. And then both arms to the left. And then that top arm, he can either open up just to the side for me. So he can open up this way and get a good stretch here. Just opening and closing here. He can add in arm circles, so he can go actually in a circle here. So if we're working with our tennis athletes, we want them to get in that position of being a little rotated and using the shoulder itself. You can go both ways with that one. That just gives us a good twist with the torso. Good stretch there for the hips and for the shoulder as well. Then we'll flip him over into all fours. So I'm going over on time, somebody yell at me. So on all fours, we're going to have him do something called a bird dog. So he's going to start with just the arms actually this time. So you'll work your athletes into this. So he's just going to take a breath in, stabilize the core, and the goal here is to not move anything but the extremity that's supposed to be moving. So he's going to lift one arm, lift the other arm, and just work on that. So he's got to be able to stabilize here and not move anything else. And then we'll have him just try the legs. So he'll kick one leg straight out without extending the spine too much or arching the spine too much. And then we're adding in opposite arm, opposite leg once he can do it. So you can have them come out, they can touch the knee and the elbow to the middle. You can vary this exercise quite a few ways. If you have a really, really awesome athlete, you can have them do same arm, same leg, super tough. When we do our FMS, our movement screens on our college athletes, it's pretty tough for a lot of kids to be able to do this. This is the one they fail quite a bit. So touch the elbow and the knee together, and then back out. Oh, it works pretty good.
Right,
Yeah, that one's really tough. It's pretty awkward if you've never done it before. But that's when we were working on stabilizing spine and adding more movement there. Next, what we're going to do is half kneeling. So we're gradually bringing him up towards the standing position. So one leg's going to go out front, one behind. We got 90-degree angles at both sides, and all I want him to do here is first kind of a psoas stretch, so your hip flexor stretch. If we're sitting all day, most of us, that's what we're doing, whether you're a student or you're working at a desk. You're sitting for a long period of time. So we've got to get those muscles that keep you here a little bit more stretched out. So for him, instead of doing a lunge forward, he's going to go, so standing nice and tall, he's just going to tuck his pelvis under. So tucking his tailbone under, if he was wearing a belt buckle, he'd be thinking about trying to look at the belt buckle. So you're trying to tilt your pelvis so you can see it. And if you do this stretch, if you guys want to hop up and do this one, it's super easy. But it's just that pelvic tuck, and you'll feel on that bottom leg a stretch through where the hip flexor is. He can add a little bit of a lean forward, but that pelvic tuck has got to be there, otherwise he's stretching the wrong muscle. So he can kind of do he can kind of pulse into the front and back, and just to add a little bit more movement to that exercise. And then from there, I'm going to have him do kind of a hip flossing exercise. So he's going to take that leg that's up, and he's going to go straight out to the side. Good. And hands are going to go out front, onto the ground. There you go. And then from there, he's just going to sit his bottom back onto his heel. So he's going to push his hands back, and then come on up. So he's going to go nice and slow through this, do several reps here, just to work on hip mobility, getting those good movement patterns there. Get a good stretch without just sitting into the stretch itself, because this is a little more applicable to what you're going to be doing in real life. And then we're going to go into, he's going to go into a lunge here. So one leg can go forward. So a high lunge, so pick up that back leg. Good. And actually, I'm going to have him walk forward. I haven't shown you this one more. So you can go into a lunge here, and we'll have our kids try to get both hands on the insides of their heel here. If they can drop down to forearms, even better. But again, we're doing that kind of hip flossing thing where you're pushing on the back leg, pushing forward, getting a little bit more mobility that way. So if you want to try that more. So the closer you can get to the forearms, the better. But working on moving a lot of joints with this one. Good. And then from there, we're going to go ahead and have a stand here. We'll go through a couple dynamic things you can do. We have to start over here if we don't pull over. But in terms of the hip mobility walk, what's that? Walking with ease. Oh, no, we didn't do that. So in terms of a hip mobility walk, he can start off, we'll just go through just pulling the knee to the chest. So he'll take about 10 steps forward, pull the knee to the chest, switch sides. So this is incorporating a little bit of walking, a little bit more movement, some hip mobility there, and actually some balance on that leg that he's standing on. He can either jog back, or you can have him do a different exercise back. He'll pull the leg back into kind of a quad stretch. So grab opposite side, pull back, and then stepping forward. Good. So getting a good quad stretch there. Again, getting some balance through there. Some other hip mobility things he can do. He can bring the heel up. Hold that stretch there. And then switch sides. So we're getting hip rotation here. And then having him pull the knee actually across the chest. So, or across this way. You're like, wait a minute. So not just bringing it straight up, but bringing it across a little bit. So we're getting all aspects of the hip mobility. Hip mobility is a huge issue for a lot of people. So nailing hip mobility is good for pretty much anybody. Haven't really run into anybody that's got too much hip mobility for the most part. Yeah.
Question about stretching, and that's different kind of stretching than just lying back and stretching. And tell me the difference in when you decide to do either one. You know what I'm saying?
Static stretching, when you're just sitting in a position for like 30 seconds, that I don't totally eliminate static stretching, but for the most part, I'm doing that after the workout when all their muscles have been working. If they want an extra stretch or if something's feeling pretty tight, I'm mostly having them doing foam roller instead. There's not a whole lot of static stretching for the most part. I mean, it gets a good stretch, but it just doesn't have a lasting benefit like it does when you incorporate movement. So, because once you stretch that muscle out, that's all well and good, but your body's got to stabilize again. So if you're not incorporating movement, then you're not incorporating that motor pattern as well. So it'll just tighten right back up on you again.
So you're doing foam rolling before and after that?
Can't do too much foam rolling. If you can give your kids one thing, give them foam rolling.
And are you big on those, the new foam rollers that have the hard
Grid.
core?
The grid?
Yeah, the grid is a really cool one. It's got PVC pipe on the inside of it and then the foam on the outside, so they last a lot longer. They don't get compressed as much. And then you can also use them for travel because they're like this big. They have really small ones too, but the half roller is awesome. And then you can just put it on your sports bag. They can take it wherever they're going. So the grid's a really good one. Yeah.
Have you used a stick, or do you talk about that already?
Yeah, we use the stick sometimes. I think the foam roller is better because you get more weight into it. And when you're kind of inflicting pain on yourself, it's easier to just lay on it rather than push on it more. So I think you get a lot better effect from doing the foam roller rather than the stick. But both are good. If you've got the stick, that's still a great way to do it. Some more dynamic stuff we can do. We can do like a walking lunge sequence. So we're going to work on lunging. We're going to work on hip mobility. So you can work in some of that hip mobility stuff. I'll just have Mark do it with me. So this is how I teach my athletes. I just do the drill with them, and then they can do it on their own the next time. But he can do some of the same hip mobility stuff, pulling the leg back. So he's balancing all on one leg, and then you're dropping into a lunge. So they're having to balance and then drop into that good lunge here. They hold this lunge. You can do a torso twist here, torso twist opposite way, and leaning up and over. And then they go straight into the next one on the opposite leg. So they've got to be able to drop into a lunge and come out of a lunge really slow and controlled. Can't be tapping the leg down. So the goal is really to balance and not have to use that other leg.
And how long are you holding, no more than 2 seconds?
Yeah, they're just going slow and controlled through the motion. So they're just dropping down, holding for about a second or a breath, and then moving into slowly into the next motion. If you think kind of about how the flow yoga classes go, they kind of flow between different exercises, and that's kind of why yoga is really taken off, because it's a really good way to get flexibility and get stability without kind of with more long-lasting effects. So, same idea there. We can have them do an inchworm. You know what an inchworm is? Okay. I like this one a lot. So they'll go into a toe touch, and they can bend their knees a little bit if they need to, but for the most part, he's going to go from a toe touch, walk his hands out into a plank position, and then walk his feet back up to meet his hands. So this is a really fun one for little kids because they like feeling like an inchworm. But it's a good one for adults too, because you're working on that plank position, that stability there, and also really working on hamstring flexibility while stabilizing. So you can sit in a hurdle stretch all day, but if you can't stabilize that, like when he's walking around, then it's just going to tighten right back up on you. So this is a really good one for him. Plus he looks cool doing it. Another thing we can do is bear crawls. I really like these, and my kids my kids thought it was hilarious when I told them to do this. But you'll start so the way he's going to start is he's going to go that all fours position first, and then he's just going to raise his bottom into the air. So he's going to come up off of his knees. So this is the bear position, and that's how he's going to start. And what we're going to do is he can do these hovering fun things if he wants to, but we're going to go opposite arm, opposite leg, so kind of like how a baby crawls. You'll see a lot of kids want to do the same arm, same leg. Those kids probably missed this step when they were developing crawling patterns. But that cross patterning is what we do in all of our sports. So when we're throwing, we're stepping forward with one hip and using the opposite arm. You've got to be able to coordinate that pattern. So you can pick a line on the tennis court, have them just go hands and feet on the line, so they're working on balance, working on that cross patterning of motor patterns. And then I like to throw my kids into some other stuff. You can have a seat, Mark, unless you want to do ladder drills.
No.
Okay. So if you guys have a ladder, you can set up a ladder. You can even throw down athletic tape in the form of a ladder, or use sidewalk chalk, whatever you need. But if you know a couple ladder speed drills for the ladder, it's a really safe exercise. Works on footwork and agility without putting too much pressure through the joints. So they can going down the side of the ladder, they can go 2 feet in, 2 feet out. They can be working on 1 foot out and stepping in the middle and coming across. But you can, if you YouTube it, you can find a bazillion speed ladder drills, and they're all pretty safe for the most part. Yeah.
Yeah, you have anything online for all these exercises?
Yeah, I do. So beginning of next week, this should all be online. I have a new blog site coming out, so I'll put all of that on there. There'll be this presentation, video examples of all the stuff that we've gone through. That way you guys have something to kind of check out when you get home. Yeah. Yep, and my card's going to be actually on that back table over here by the lamp. There's some programs about our actual, our company as well, so you guys can grab those on the way out or chat with me. But yeah, I'll work on speed ladder drills, some of those pro agility shuttles where you've got cones and they're having to do different tasks between them. With the warm-up, you're working on their transfer from one direction to the other. So they're tapping with one hand, stabilizing the actual transfer from one leg to the opposite leg, and that's what you're looking for there. You can increase the speed as they get better, but that way we just worked from breathing on the ground all the way up to doing more sport-specific activities for them. So it seems like a long time when we're describing it here, but it actually goes by pretty fast. Some of these exercises can be quicker than just sitting and stretching because you're using a lot of different joints all at once. So it doesn't have to be a pain in the butt to have an awesome movement preparation or warm-up for your kids, and it's going to be really beneficial in the long run in terms of injury prevention, in terms of maximizing power output, maximizing performance later on.
How much time do you reckon that? I mean, now pros do 45 minutes to an hour. It's hard to get the kids to do 5 minutes. So
yeah, so I mean, if you're doing like 15 minutes of it at the beginning, that's a solid goal. But yeah, when I'm warming up I did track in college and we'd warm up for 45 minutes. Yeah. Little kids are going to have more of an attention span problem, so doing stuff like the inchworm, you can extend your warm-up and give them something to do where they don't feel like they're just sitting around and stretching. So giving them more activities is really good. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So what effect do you think breath holding during exercise has on muscle injury?
Breath holding. I mean, we need our kids to breathe, but I think it's really important to emphasize when you're doing warm-up and such is really to work on that belly breathing. So breathing the way they're supposed to, and getting oxygen to your muscles is really important. There's certain things like in a sprint, I know I hold my breath for the first half of the race, which is crazy, but it's something that your kids are probably going to do instinctively, so it's in a competition. So working on it when you're in practice, making sure they're breathing then will carry over to the competition a little better as well, so,
It's the adults who really hold their breath,
yeah.
with their concentration, so just curious.
Yeah, so you should be able to breathe and concentrate at the same time is really the issue, so.
Ideally.
So working on that in warm up is a good way to address it actually. Any other questions? Yeah, if you guys have your handout, that last slide has a lot of my contact info, so you can contact me. I have a Facebook page. The blog is going to probably be the most helpful because we'll have this on there, a lot of different exercises, things like that you can look at. And then it's got my office number on there as well if you want more information. I'll be hanging out here. Cards are in the back, so it's got my email on there. So feel free to email me with any questions, even if you have a kid who wants to be a chiropractor maybe one day. Even questions like that, I'll answer any of them. So thank you guys so much for paying attention to all the nitty-gritties, but